Now, this is a really great score, Luca. Thank you so much for the work that you put into it and the imagination and the craft. You really did a fantastic job. And now, having said that, I'm going to talk about all the things that I think you could fix. But it's all right. There's nothing drastically wrong here, and I think that the approach is very strong, pretty much across all concerns. However, I think I can help you with a lot of stuff here. So let's start by talking about the harp. Sorry about that clinking and clanking. Let's take a quick look at that harp and just talk about the overall balance at the same time. Now, I really appreciate that you are trying to keep the balance right in here by keeping the brass down a little, right? And so that there's a better mix. So, I mean, that's all fine. I think that you could probably even notch up your muted trumpets and stopped horns. I think you could even go up to forte here and here. I think that would be fine. But I mean, it's nice to have this little punch in the background too, right? So I'm not saying you have to do it one way or another, but just it may be softer than you need it to be, right? So right here you've got fortissimo, mezzo forte, forte in the plucked instruments, right? And then xylophone forte. So xylophone's a pretty loud instrument. It just kind of has just a natural tendency to shout over the top of the orchestra. I would say that, like, if you want a really good balance here, all these instruments should be the same dynamic as the winds, right? So you could have fortissimo winds and strings and harp, and then mezzo forte, brass. I think it's fine the way that you've got it scored, and then forte on the xylophone is fine. But it's here's the thing: is like the harp part actually works if things don't get to be too loud, right? So here you've got plucking across the same the same pitch range as it's exactly the same pitch range as the strings, but since you roll the chord, you only do it once, then it will be sort of heard, right? But the plucking of the strings will tend to sort of absorb the sound of the harp, so it will have a less glorious sound. Now, if you had the harp playing this an octave higher, then you would really be able to hear the harp very, very nicely. But I really think, harp should be fortissimo, the pizzicato should be fortissimo. Maybe you could try a few little like dynamic variances, right? So fortissimo and then just like mezzo forte, just back off a little bit and then come back strong and then back off a little. Maybe that could be a way of getting some variation between the two different sections that repeat, A, B, A, B. But, here's an example of a harp part that's actually working pretty well. Now, as far as the glissando is concerned, I feel this is where you could really have a much wider pitch range for a much more effective glissando. Like, this is practically a scale. There are so few pitches per time value. You could have this 2 octaves, right? This have a nice big sweep, right? So I don't really know that. I don't really think you even need to have like octaves. It's a slightly bigger sound, but it's the overall effect is the ear is going to pick out the glissando on top rather than the one on the bottom. So, with that said, there are some problems in here in that I just feel that the harp in here is going to be invisible in these 4 bars. This will be audible, but since you're having, say, 16 violinists all plucking a B here, and you have a single harpist plucking 1 B string here, right? Who's going to win in that fight? And then here you're marking piano and having the same pitches covered by the lower strings. So, once again, they will completely overwhelm the harp, right? So you made a lot of calculations in here, but like, the biggest problem of them all is the fact that you have xylophone happening at the same time as harp. So the xylophone sound just tends to absorb what's going on in the harp. So like glissandos, rolls, those are things that get around the xylophone sound. But it's just, generally speaking, xylophone and harp are, in a chamber combination, they can work well. In fact, I've scored things for xylophone, for marimba and harp, and that works really, really well. But the xylophone's just very, very harsh sound tends to really absorb things. So you might need to rethink a few things in there. All right. So now let's talk about the actual evaluation criteria. There is a bit of a concern in, pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano score. If that is transcribed directly onto the orchestra, then you end up with a very narrow band of timbres, right? Just everything is kind of on the right-hand side of the piano keyboard from middle C up. Now here you have you've stretched things out a little bit, right? So you pretty much obey Falla's original pitches here, and then you get about an octave bigger. Actually, you're adding a little bit here and there. That's true. And then you get an octave bigger and so on. So I think that helps a lot. Now, the next concern is thematic material repeats often, possibly sounding repetitive if orchestrated exactly the same way twice, right? So you kind of have, you're kind of facing that problem. So here you're saying, Ah, two. All right, and that's one. Okay, I see. All right, so yeah, I would say like here you're adding a little bit of weight, right? A little bit of bottom end. If there's something you could do to just make it a slightly heavier in here, just a little bit heavier. Maybe like a really like have the timpani give a really firm downbeat here. Maybe that might be one way of doing it, or add a specific percussion effect in here. I think that could really go a long way to having just a nice, much more emphatic sound the second time around. Okay, now as to the actual orchestration, it's fairly straightforward and kind of nicely done. You've got a triple octave of Bs here, sounding Bs. In your winds, we've got doubling on by the first clarinet and oboe, and then you've got this little yip up up up. That's really nice. Dun 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 rum. That's really cool. All right, so like nobody feel like you have to finish these four this little four note fragment on a B, right? You don't have to go yet dun 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 dun, right? I mean, that doesn't have to be a thing, right? Anyway, the thing that I worry about is just that turning this into a motive that goes yet dun 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 takes away from the independence of the melody in each B section, right? So yet dun 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 dun, as opposed to yum 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 bum 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 yum 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 bum 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 dun 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 dun. See the difference there? It's like this doesn't have to be I'm finishing here and I'm starting here, right? So it just has to do with rhythmic phrasing, right? It's like where do you begin and where do you end? And I'll have a little bit more to say about rhythmic phrasing here. So yeah, so I feel that it's just more independent for the melody line to just start all by itself without encapsulating this little 4 bar phrase or bringing it to a close. I just feel that's a little forced. I like the reinforcement of the line. Now, as to this scoring right in here, the non-divisi pizzicato triple stop with a breaks on it, or a bracket on it. I don't feel that you need to do that. I think you should just say non-divisi. See, the thing about the bracket is that to some players that implies non-arpeggiando, right? Which means that they would have to sort of grasp the 3 strings with their fingertips and just pluck, right? And if they do that, if you're implying that they need to pluck with 2 or 3 fingers at one time, then it's really hard to hold the bow, which means that if you really do mean non-arpeggiando here, then they're going to have time to pick their bows up, right? So like there isn't enough time here. That it's and some people just interpret that to mean non-divisi, right? But you're already saying non-divisi, so you don't need the bracket. So I think that it's better to leave the bracket out and just to say non-divisi, and everybody will understand what you mean, right? And then you just say non-divisi, and then you could say sim, and then everybody will think that everybody will just keep that approach. And I mean, I think that there would be very few violinists who would play this divisi, right? You've got the open D and A, it's just so easy, right? And then here you've got the open E on top, and here you've got the open D on the bottom, and the open D on the bottom here. So yeah, this is kind of strange the way you've divided this up. I would think that it would be stronger to have the viola play the C and the second violin to play the F. I just think it's just brighter that way. All right. I think that you could just keep this entire passage in treble clef. So that's what I would prefer as a violist until right here. Then I would say go back to alto clef here. It's just hardly worth it, right? If you're only going to have 4 notes between these 2 treble staff bars, then it's better just to have those 4 notes be, just read this as E in treble clef, right? It's just easier. Okay, now back to the overall evaluation. So I feel that the orchestration for this works pretty well, right? And the introduction of the brass right in here is really nice. So the next concern is melodic development soaring quite high to the uppermost orchestral register, and I think you manage that really nicely. Like first flute playing a solo, the ottavino, the piccolo coming in and doubling, and yeah, just there is nothing wrong with the first flute dropping if you wanted it to, but I like the way that you have the integrity of the line here. I think that works really well. I wouldn't add anything lower in the flute here myself. So that works great. And then right in here, this is also nicely scored. Yeah, and then adding the octave below, right? Okay, so here's the problem, though, with this whole thing, right? And that is, how much xylophone do you really want at the beginning of your piece, right? Do you want this much xylophone? The thing about it is that the xylophone really, it just really takes over the music, right? It's kind of like, I think I mentioned in a couple of previous evaluations, it's sort of like, being in the hospital, with half your body in a cast, and then your neighbor comes over for a visit, or your aunt comes over for a visit, and all she wants to talk about is, how she had a headache last week, right? And there you are lying in traction, unable to move, right? And she wants to talk about her headaches. So it's the same thing. It's kind of like the xylophone just really kind of takes over and makes everything about themselves, right? And so that's like, do you really want that? Do you want this to turn into a xylophone concerto at the beginning? I almost feel like with xylophone, it's like less is more. Like the more you can, the more you can kind of hold it back, the more powerful it becomes. And then, but then the more that you use it, the more that it just dominates everything, and you have like the subtlety of your orchestration becomes sort of lost because everybody's just listening to the xylophone go on and on, right? He's like the loudmouthed guy at the party, right? All right. So like the next concern in our list of criteria is the accompaniment figures. In the piano part, they cover quite a wide range of pitches. And I think that if you are scoring them pizzicato, it's right here anyways. It's a pretty safe place to do it. Then you've got it right in here as well. I think that considering the sparseness of this orchestration right in here, I think you've got it just right. You don't need to really have this doubled by winds. I mean, doubling the B on top is fine, right? So, in fact, doubling that B by first oboe is even more of an argument to not even bother with the harp, right? Because the harp is just still is doing even less with the introduction of the oboe right here. Now, the same thing could be said about the pitches right in here that I said about these 4 bars here. It's just that they really, don't contribute a whole lot with the lower strings playing the pizzicato here. So the harp, it's the same pitches that the lower strings are playing. So the harp really will get swallowed up by the sound of the pizzicato. And that leads to this section here. Now, there is a slight concern which may be relevant right here, and that is if you are completely obeying the same pitches, if you're transcribing the same pitches as the piano score, you may get to a point here where it just feels relentless if there's no textural contrast. Now, there is a bit of textural contrast, except that, keeping going with the xylophone and sort of using similar instruments that you did before and so on. I mean, there's a bit of contrast, but it's not all that pronounced, right? So, but I mean, at least you've got arco strings. So I mean, they're if there's anything that you could do to just bring out more different, like more of a pronounced different color between this section and what happened previously, I think that's you couldn't go wrong. And that might be stopping, just ending the xylophone right here, perhaps. But like, if you're really in love with the xylophone and the way the xylophone runs up to this E and you want to stay there, and the same thing with these other parts, then you have to be aware of another problem, and that is in the piano score, Falla has the piano run all the way up to that high E, as we can see here expressed in the piccolo part, sounding an octave higher. And then what happens? He drops an octave. And why does he drop an octave? Is because this is the end of the rhythmic phrase. Right? And the next phrase starts on beat 2. Da da da, and it goes 2 3 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1. Right? So by rushing up to the top and making this the first note of a row of 4 E's, right? Instead of dropping an octave. So what you achieve by having those 4 identical E's in a row is you force this into a different context, right? So it's just 1 2 3 1 2 and 3 and 1, right? So it's like we kind of lose the emphasis on the second beat when that happens. And it doesn't really feel like this is coming to a close. It just feels like it's running up to the beginning of a new phrase. So see that it's like a subtle difference, right? But it's one that, like, we as orchestrators can completely, we can completely mess with the original intentions of the composer with those decisions. So anyway, so that's just something to watch out for. Now you may decide, well, hey Thomas, I'm completely happy with that, and I prefer that, and I think that that's what Falla meant. And if that's so, then that's fine with me. I mean, but I think my feeling is it's pretty clear from the piano score that he wants to end the previous phrase on the 1 and then start a new phrase on the 2, right? In that case, like, maybe it would be better to drop the piccolo part or some other kind of thing, or to maybe have like less weight on this, just E, like the same thing, rather than E, yep-a-dup-a-dum, right? Anyhow, you can solve a lot of these problems by discontinuing the xylophone right here, right? But other than that, it's very nicely scored. I think you could have, like, right here, you're kind of having your brass kind of take the role of the middle winds right in here, right? And that's fine. You give it a nice rich sound. And that certainly is a bit of a timbral contrast to before, because you have more sustained notes in the brass, and that's I would say that would qualify. Then that just simply leads to, and that's very, very cool, right, and wow. So A3 oboes going bum. That is really going to scream. All right, so we've got a big stack of oboes and first trumpet. Yeah. And violins, all sitting on that sounding A. A, da, 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 dun. Let me just flip back for a second. All right, so forte. So this will be a very earthy kind of a sound with like that much weight, and the strings just being at forte right in here, and the violas, right? So you're this stacking the violas and the first violins together like this will not necessarily make them equal in strength to what's going on in the winds and brass. But I mean, it's a good try, right? It'll be a very, very thick, dense sound. I wouldn't change it. I think that's fine. You got to listen to that and see for yourself. Yeah, yeah, this is all okay. I like the big roll. It should be fortissimo. Big roll in the harp. That's nice. And background horns. Our big concern here, of course, is that in the piano score, the the most of the pitches are not really all that different from the previous few pages, right? It's still right in the middle register. So bringing in lower notes is great, right? Broadening the scope of the texture is absolutely indicated. So you're doing that very well. The main problem here is maintaining differentiated roles, right? So like all of the different functions that are happening in the music are very close together right here. So, having, very, very obvious, very easy to hear descending harmonic tones right here, that is extremely important. Having a very well-defined leaping bass kind of a part here, I think that is also pretty important. And then, of course, there's little beeps coming at the top. That's very nice. And I like the enharmonic doubling right here, the E natural and the F flat in 2 octaves. I think that'll work pretty good. Yeah. Once again, fortissimo, right? To match the pitch or the weight of the flute family above. Now, just a comment, Luca. Maybe you haven't heard this before or yet or whatever, but I really like, I prefer that my entries for this challenge maintain the same rehearsal marks as I've indicated in the materials, in like the template and in the video with piano plus score and so on. Yeah, I really do. It just really helps me to organize these lectures and everything else. So if you could, put the B rehearsal mark here, and then in the next screen, the C is like is starting with the beginning of the next section. It should be a bar before. Okay, so just please, keep that in mind for future evaluations. Okay. Yeah, so here you're saying stopped first horn. Yeah, I think that, all you need to do is just have the plus sign over the first horn part, and you don't even need to worry about the second horn part. I think that the copyist will get it, that the second horn part is not stopped. And I think if you are in any way doubtful, you could always have the little circle sign, the harmonic circle sign, and then parentheses around it, right? So that just sort of says like, so you don't have to. I think that while this is well meant, I think it's just more clutter on the page. I think you could just have the little plus sign over all the notes, right? And I think that works best. But I mean, you could always say, yeah. I mean, you could say stopped first and then open here, right? Because it's if you do it in text, it's something that is going to last until you correct it, right? So I would want you to write open here, even though you have this bracket, right? Just to remind the player or the copyist. Okay. Yeah. All right, so going on here, we have bum 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 bum. So why couldn't the trombone start on the downbeat? Right? I mean, there's nothing about its range that puts that A out of grasp. I mean, like, is it because you wanted the contrabassoon to sound, but then you should have marked it louder, right? So it isn't like soft da 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 da, right? Because you've already got this pizzicato and so on. Yeah, I don't think you need to. I don't think you need to have your double bass and contrabassoon parts marked piano. I think, yeah, I think that the volume could come up there. But I do like the fact. I do like the idea of the horns in the background. I think that's great. Okay. Yeah, timpani, soft. That's really neat. The pedal glissando right here. That is kind of fun. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I mean, one thing I do miss here is like here you've got the doubling from the first trombone, and I think that's very effective. But then here there's like no doubling at all from anybody, and could you have doubled this part with like bassoon, and that way you could finish on the triplet, right? This is something that wasn't quite clear from the piano score, that this line ends in the triplet. Right, that's the and then like just the fact that there was in the right hand part there is a B below middle C, right, which we see you're scoring here as a horn note. It kind of gives the illusion that that's where the melody line is ending, but it really is crossing staves and going to right. I guess I could have made that more clear on the template. All right, so going forward, we need to think about keeping triplets from overwhelming the melodic line above, and the widely reaching left-hand patterns, which I think that this is fairly nicely scored. You've got the timpani in there, and you've got your lower strings doing the staccato. I don't think you need to have like piano here. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. Just have everybody be the same dynamic level in all the parts. Yeah. All right. So you scored this pretty delicately. It's nice, and I like the fact that the triplets are very, very easy to hear. Right? There's just a little, and yeah, and here you got this pizzicato glissando, and I love the fact that you make it really, really clear that that's what it is. That's da da da, and it will really, since these pitches are really like only a half step apart and it's fairly fast, the sort of sliding effect will be less prominent, especially as doubled by the clarinet right in here, first clarinet. But it's still a cool idea. All right. Yeah. I feel that the this on the harp is very cool, but I just don't know if if you've got these instruments in here, the lower strings playing the pattern, I don't know if it really, and especially also having to play alongside timpani, even with the timpani being piano and the harp being forte, right? I still feel that the harp is going to get swallowed up by everybody in there. Sorry to say. But I like the little. Okay, so if you did this here, then why do you need to do it here and there, right? And in fact, you don't need to do it at all. All you need is a starting note and an ending note, and a glissando line and a pedal mark, right? A pedal diagram. And then if everything else is the same and there are no changed pitches in the part, then just leave out the pedal diagram because your pedals are set, and just have have the notes. Once again, I feel it's like you're having really short glissandos. Right? Your glissandos are covering like on the previous page is less than an octave, I think, and then here it's just a little bit more than an octave. I think you could be covering more ground. right? Just to have a bigger sweep, because that really does make a difference in helping the harp to be heard and to make the part feel more dynamic. All right, so let's talk about that melody. Yeah, so you are. Yeah, I see. I'm hip to what you're doing here. Yeah, so we've got that doubling here, and then yeah. See, so I'm not as. I mean, I love the combination of the horn and the trombone here, right? And then you do just trombone, and then it's like really, and then you have the other trombone part. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that the yeah. Hmm. Yeah, so the way that this is scored, pretty much the first horn part here is going to thicken the trombone part a little, but not really all that much. There's like one of my concerns here in my evaluation criteria is keeping the textural contours fresh and not too much the same, right? So you are accomplishing some of that with some subtraction here and there, right? You're using a little bit less of this thing or that, or adding a little bit more here and there. But I'm not so sure, like, if the texture is really progressing, right, is really making that much of a change quite yet, right? And yeah, I mean, yeah, if you're going to have a trombone soloist and a harp part competing with other things, I think that the harp part is probably, yeah, yeah, it just needs a bit of work right in there. Yeah, but this is really lovely right in here. I love the way that you bring this to an end. It's really nice. Okay, and then you've got a chisura here, and that's great. Okay, and I would say of all of the entries, this is one of the strongest to handle the allargando expansion here, right? So, I mean, you say sostenuto, but that doesn't really mean anything. It just means to sustain the pitches, right? There isn't really a sense like here you have the ritardando line coming to an end. So we're kind of assuming that it's meno mosso, or there's even more of a slowdown. I had a ritardando mark in the template, and then of course there's the French word for retardando on top of that. Right. So I think you do. I think you do need to tell us right in here. Um, what is up with that? Like just some kind of more of a tempo mark than a like a something that talks about mood or technique. But yeah, but all that aside, you really got the whole idea of the notes sustaining as the pitches rise, right? And I felt it was beautifully scored too. Yeah, and then nice kind of glissando leading to glissando here. That is cool. Yeah, so just very, very nicely done. And then a smooth release into the new section right here, right? So yeah, and once again, yeah, just like I don't make mistakes about this, all right? So I think some people thought, oh, Thomas just got the rehearsal mark a bar off. No, I didn't. There's a reason why it is here, and in fact, you'll occasionally see a score from a great master, and the master has elected to throw in the rehearsal mark before the beginning of the next section, just because the part that leads into it is probably where there's going to be the most practice. So it's easier on the conductor to say, okay, everybody back to C, rather than like over and over again. Everybody get back to a bar before C. Everybody get back to 2 bars before C. Okay, so it's not all that weird to put the rehearsal mark before the double bar. But in this case, it's just has to do with the way that the piece really is divided this section is really more a part, or this bar is more a part of the next section than it is really finishing up the previous section, right? It really is like in terms of the orchestration problems, right? So like the reasons for the placement of the rehearsal marks where they are is because they are helping to define sections that have orchestration relevance, right? So you could make an argument that says, well, this is the cadence leading to, right? So that like this is kind of the end, right? This is kind of our new 5/1 right in here. Okay, so that's fine, but in terms of the orchestration problem, the problem begins right here on the downbeat, and it looks forward to the next section. So let's do that too. All right, now you have this big sweep up to this massive fortissimo, and then you just suddenly drop back. And I think that, with all respect here, I don't think that it's really like, I think the strategy of marking the solo part really, loud and the accompaniment part really soft is not the greatest approach when you have a solo instrument that is as powerful as a trumpet, right? Like the sound of the trumpet can obscure a lot of what's going on here in the celesta and so on. So, it might be better to have, like, if the whole orchestra is playing pianissimo espressivo, I think that the trumpet player could be piano espressivo, and it would be enough just to write solo and have lots of nuances, which is something I'm going to talk about next. But as far as the concern here of careful treatment of the melodic voice to make it feel authentic to the composer's style, you cannot go wrong with a very emotional trumpet right in here. And I noticed that the sound that you're using here has a lot of vibrato in it and so on. And I think that all works really, really well with the style. Now, lento ma non troppo. Okay, so look, it is, what does it say in the score? It says twice as slow, but a little more, right? Ma sempre mosso, right? So it really it isn't, it isn't not too slow. It is, not too much slow. It is really more a nervous kind of, it really has this wonderful, in the piano score, it has this wonderful, nervous, bustling energy, right? Which is a great pad upon which to build this declamatory kind of a sound. So maybe rethink the tempo in here. And then like later on, after the agitato, you let the orchestra go really fast. And I feel like it almost feels like you want the orchestra to just get that part over with really quick so you can go on to the ending, right? It kind of has this rushed feeling, just kind of almost, almost like there's a hurry to get it over with. So I would say this could be faster, that part could be slower. All right, but we'll talk about that when we get there. So, just remember, the horn played in this register is already loud, and you're going all the way up to B, right? So it's just naturally you can mark it piano, but it's going to end up sounding more mezzo forte, right? So just think of piano as this really big world, right? It's got a lot of space. If you've ever seen my diagram of dynamic balance in an orchestra, right? You've got sort of it's a Venn diagram with forte on one side and piano on the other. And mezzo forte and mezzo piano are like a really small sliver in the middle where the two meet, sort of mezzo dynamics. And then there's this big world of piano on one side and a big world of forte on the other. And those are like the basic dynamics that each instrument are meant to sound good at, right? And then the mezzo dynamics in the middle are more like blending tones, maybe kind of like moderated tones. And then at the very edges on either side, we have like extra soft, extra loud. So piano can be a bigger world than maybe you think, right? And And here as well, I think we're missing an opportunity to really have like beautifully nuanced kinds of lines, right? Just because Falla left it up to the pianist, right? He says, well sung, very expressive in the melody, right? So you have to write that out for the player, like bien chantant. You have to tell the singer what to sing, right? So you could just mark this down to piano espressivo and let the register of the trumpet do the work, right? And you can bring them up to a forte or a mezzo forte here and there, but like, so starting off, ba, then a little crescendo, da 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 da, little diminuendo. Now here, a slur over these tenuto marks turns us into portato, which is a much more interesting thing to play. So you can just pulse each of these notes. Da, da, crescendo, then diminuendo. Then a little crescendo here. Da, more crescendo, da, diminuendo, da, 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 crescendo, da, 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 dum. Diminuendo, da, 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 dum. Da 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 da. You could go all the way up to mezzo forte here. Bum 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 bum. Why go diminuendo there? Just because it's in the piano part. Da 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 da. And strong, and then diminuendo here. So yeah, so those are, yeah, and then right. There's this bottled up energy which you don't get at 68, right? That's in this accompaniment part. You see what I mean? It's like it just with the aggressiveness of the part, right, is sort of absent at that slower tempo. And this is really fun right in here. This push, yeah, nicely crafted. But once again, Harp is not going to add anything here. You might as well just have a nice, like here's you have a much wider glissando, right? You could even start an octave lower, right, and just go whoosh, just this big sweep, right? It's generally speaking, this is kind of a fun idea to have the pizzicato below, kind of like triple strings right in here, pizzicato, and then have the xylophone and the celesta kind of doing the off the eighth kind of playing right in between each one. That's something that they definitely can easily do, right? Both parts. And then, oboe, a nice, beautiful oboe solo here, going all the way up to E flat. It's going to sound a bit thin, but it's fine. Right? And here, I would say, you could have it as a like poco forte or even as mezzo forte, maybe. It's not as nice a sound as a softer oboe, but you're kind of leading somewhere, right? So you want a little stronger, little more strength right in here. And once again, portato, you can put it in here, and like, and more nuances and everything else. I just think will lead to something a little stronger. Okay, so our concerns here, I'm not going to get into the accompaniment pattern being too regular, because I feel that that's not as much of a concern with this approach, but we are getting to the place where I've mentioned in my criteria that managing the sense of restraint is really, really important from the third bar, right? So I feel you're coming in a little early on the ritenuto, right? So if you listen to pianists playing it, they actually start in right in here, right? Da 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 ba 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 da. And then a little pull right in here, da 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 da, and then even slower, da 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 da, right? Then everything kind of cools down, and then there's almost this little echo, da 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 da, and then right here, like your ritardando is coming in a little late. This is where we're starting to amp up the energy a little bit. Da da da. Da 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 dum. Ba 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 dum. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's yeah, I mean yeah. Yeah, but I mean this is cool. Maybe there's a little too much glissando is happening, for emphasis. You don't want it's sort of like a um like imagine you went into a bar and you really wanted to impress people. And so, like, you just found a moment where it would be really, really great, and you just pulled out $100 bill and you put it down on the counter and said, "I'm paying for everybody's drinks," and everybody's really impressed by that, right? So that's what a glissando is on the harp. So if you keep pulling out those $100 bills and sort of paying everybody, after a while, everybody gets used to it, and it's like, oh, well, we'll continue to drink. We won't worry about it. We don't need to make as much of an investment here because that guy over there is paying, he's pulling out $100 bill whenever things get exciting. So, yeah, so just be careful not to spend too much. And of course, as before, just a starting note, an ending note, a glissando line, and a pedal diagram. You do not need to write out all of the notes. This is something that you see in older scores. It's really not needed in contemporary scores or scores of people orchestrating today, even orchestrating things from older styles. Right. Okay. So I feel that if you mark rubato right here instead of a tempo, then you are allowing the players and the conductor to shape these phrases, right? So da da ba 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 bum da 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 ba 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 bum, and then you don't have to score this out in half time, right? Da 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 da. Right? So maybe that could use a rethink as well, right? Just the power of just saying rubato here, right? And then you can sort of tweak you can tweak the dynamics with invisible text or whatever. But having said all that, it's nicely orchestrated. I like how after having made that big statement on trumpet, you're not overdoing it on the brass. They just have a little bit of punchy trumpet right in there, and then you bring everybody back. It's just really nicely done right in here. This is not going to be heard at all in the harp. Yeah. And I think that you need a dynamic here, an entrance dynamic, because it shouldn't be mezzo piano still, right? Just I would either start piano or mezzo forte here. All right, and this is cool right in here. This sort of all this swooping around, very very fun. Yeah, and then the trills, and then this is all really great. Yep, clarinets, flutes, that all works great. And yeah, I like the way that you support it and all these other things. Yep, absolutely no problem with any of this. This is nice, and the push that you've got in here with your horns. And I would even go further to say that this is all done great too. Just you have, and I really love the way that you wrote out your first beam group, and then from there on you just have the measured tremolo beam. Now here you could express these as quarter notes with just a single stem and two like the 16th note or double measured tremolo beam, right? Yeah, and just supporting it with some bassoon family right in there. That's nice. Yeah. Okay, so you just had agitato, and I don't know if you listened to the piano performances, but I feel that they're really key to an understanding of what's going on here. See, like, it doesn't say to go any slower in the piano score, but if you listen to pianists play it, they draw back a little bit, like if they were going 152 or 168 or whatever before, now they're kind of drawing back to about 132, and they're starting to play very dreamily, right? And then they start to push a little bit, and it's a little rubato, and maybe they might speed up a little bit going into this, but it doesn't really get all that fast, because right in here they're going to have this big allargando, just dun 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 dun, right? So I feel that that's the emotional power of this section right in here, and just by letting it kind of run on at agitato, I just feel like it just feels like rushed, just let's get it over with, right? Is what I kind of feel at that tempo. So just watch out for that. I think that you are possibly missing out on some of the emotional power that you could have been putting in here. And that's not, now right here, it's like this just really gets confusing looking, right? So you could just start this in the lower staff, and then glissando up, and then glissando down. And then, yeah, I think there's better ways of doing this. What's wrong with doing an octave glissando that goes to the highest D, and then this one going to the D below that, right? I just think you would cover way more ground, and it would be way more effective. But once again, you're throwing those $100 bills around, right? So watch out. How many glissandos can you put into, or harp glissandos can you put into a piece before the audience starts to just kind of not be impressed by them, and just just think, yeah, okay, there's a glissando there, right? Rather than going, oh, that took my breath away. That just sudden breath of energy from the harp, right? So it's just you don't want people to ever expect it. You want it to be just something that sort of sweeps up the energy and pulls it all along. Right. So, okay, so if everybody really is soft here, then the harp is audible, right? And if you really keep controlling this in the background, I would say terrace these dynamics. Don't just have a piano crescendo poco a poco with a dashed line. So, maybe piano and then crescendo here, and then mezzo piano, crescendo whenever it goes da 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 da, right? That kind of da 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 da, and the or just have a little bit of crescendo there, and then and so piano, crescendo to mezzo piano, crescendo to mezzo forte, crescendo to forte, crescendo to fortissimo. I think that's better to terrace it like that, rather than to just stick a line on it, because it's kind of subjective, and like it puts the responsibility like of the conductor to sort of convey this, and for everybody to. I just think it's easier just to terrace it and to mark each one. Especially since like it's so easy to leave it out, isn't it? Right? Like are the horns still going to be playing? What was their last dynamic? Pianissimo, right? So are they still going to be playing pianissimo all the way through here? Maybe you forgot to mark some dynamics. So, having said all that, I think that it's really nicely scored. No big problems. I think it'll balance nicely. I like the treatment of the winds. I like how the brass come in. It's working pretty well, I would say. Yeah, and this part is all good, right? But just imagine, like, you have so much power, you have so much energy in here, You know, da 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 da. Agitato again. Right. Okay, and you've sort of structured things differently in the way that you interpret things. You really don't have that so you don't have the rotating pattern here. So you've chosen to leave it out. That's your decision. That's fine. But seeing as how that is, it doesn't really matter. You don't really need like a pause here, like I have recommended for other orchestrators. So yeah, if you're going to take it up to there, boom, right, and then this will come out of it, and it will all sound fine. Yeah, so it's doubtful that this would make that the harp will be all that audible here. Maybe an octave higher, right? Or maybe hand over hand roll. It needs to be bigger, right? Because yeah, crescendo and then coming back from a fortissimo on these coming back to forte, the brass in the background. I just feel that it is all very obscuring of the harp right in here. So set it. If you have to have harp in there, put it an octave higher, I think. Right, and then backing off a little bit. I think that's great with doubling by the bassoons. Yeah. So one of our problems right in here is like a convincing transition from this part going into the next section, into F. So, if there's some way of setting up what's happening in the next bar, right? Whether it is having your strings kind of go from being tremolo and so on. Okay, this is what's bothering me right in here, right? I'll talk about a little bit more about what I was just about to discuss here in a second, but I don't think that this will be all that much different from measured tremolo at agitato, measured tremolo in 16th notes, right? Because it's just so fast. That's what you kind of want, right? You just want that kind of trembling sound. But the fact that these pitches have to change so often, I think that just in the end you just end up with something that's very, very close to being I think that just ends up being very, very similar to doubling the bow on each note, right? As opposed to how fast of a tremolo could you get on this at that tempo, right, on all those different notes. So that might be something you might want to think about. But anyways, that sort of just leads into this, and that is like, is there some way to smooth this out? So we're going from this nervous part into the smooth part, right? And like maybe we could ease off on the tremolo and make these more slurred notes until finally we release into here and everything is nice and smooth. All right, so here we are at the E section. Sorry, I said F earlier. Here we are at the E section. And I really think this is cool, the way that you have taken the rotating patterns of the left hand of the piano and you have transcribed them onto the celesta. All right, the only problem that I've got here is the distance between these parts, right? So it isn't really rotating. It does rotate, but it rotates very, very far apart. Right? So it's really, really, really far apart. And also taking into mind that celesta is already ottava, right? So not only is it an octave apart, or is it an octave higher than it would be normally, it's 2 octaves higher than it would be normally compared to, all things equal compared to the piano part. So, yeah, so that's just like the, I don't know. I mean, I think you could score the harp part higher or the celesta part lower, right? And get a more dependable relationship between the two. I like the idea of the vibes in here. That is the coolest thing. I wish there were a way. I wish there was a way that you could bow all of these vibes. But I think that just as long as you are doubling it with violas and solo cello, I think that that works just fine. All right, and this is lovely right in here. Okay, but nuances. You know, da 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 da. You see, like there's so much you could be doing for the player to just to guide them through this piano espressivo and just just a little bit of a push right in here. And this is a place in the piano score where it actually does mark portato, right? So don't leave it out. Put it back in here. You know, and then a nice crescendo, diminuendo, another crescendo, diminuendo, and then an echo. Then really push here. And this is nice, diminuendo. So I think there's a lot that you could do here. Yeah, see here you're saying forte espressivo. That's totally unnecessary. Piano espressivo. There's a big world of piano right in there that you can explore. Yeah. All right, and this is really, really cool. Like you're interpreting the kind of the icy section right in here. We have floated down in our pleasure boat with our favorite person in the beautiful perfumed night, away from the big party, away from the celebrations. We get a ways down the river, and we look back at the at that little glowing party up on the hill, and from very, very far away we can hear the music, right? And it almost sounds icy in the moonlight, right? And so you're interpreting that. That's really great. Vibraphone, yeah, I think that's exactly the right way to do it. Just the vibraphone doubling, but not on every beat, right? And here you could just say arpeggiando, right? Just give it, or just have a roll and say sim afterwards, right? Rather than having this be so cluttered. So, yum, 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 da, 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 da. All right, and then we have to get from icy to intimate. And I like that. Da, 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 with the bassoons. It's very, very cool. So then from intimate to mysterious, right? Bum, 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 bum. Suddenly you're aware of all the weird noises of the night with your favorite person sitting next to you in the boat. And then this is all really cool too. Da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum. Yeah. So English horn right there. The thing is, like you're saying, as soft as possible, but like you're using kind of the most difficult part of the oboist's range. I would be half tempted to give this to the second oboe player rather than the first oboe if I just really wanted somebody who could finesse those lower sounds. But the better, the best solution of all would be to have this played by English horn and this played by bassoon or clarinet or some other instrument that could just really effortlessly go down to that B. So because like right in here you're asking your English horn player to like play their low sounding E, and it isn't the easiest thing in the world. I mean, I've had some English horn players comment to me that we should be able to, we English horn players should be able to treat that low B with a lot more security than oboe players treat their low B flat, or their low B for that matter. But it can still be a soggy note. It can be harder to control, right? So there's no total guarantees unless you have like absolutely great top of the line professional players, and even at that, they may feel that they could, they'll play this and they'll still feel that they could have gotten it better, right? So maybe there's a rethink in order here. I mean, I think that bottom that really should be more of an English horn thing, right? But then you're losing your English horn, and so what could replace it? Since you have an English horn, sorry, you have a first bassoon part coming to an end here. So it's a bit of a trap right in there. And this is really lovely right at the end. This is just pure poetry. I love the way that you got this. I like the divided first violins. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of behaving like a finger tremolo, though it really is a trill. It's to all intents and purposes a trill, just starting on the upper note. Yeah, but it's so cool. Celesta, harp, bum, bum, bum. And then just the beautiful arpeggio right in there. And then here you've got some bisbigliando right in here. I mean, you might as well score it. That is the place where it would be, the best out of this entire piece. It still might not be all that audible, but I like what you've done here. So yeah, so really great work, Luca. It's such a fun score. I mean, it's I'm picking it apart and making all these suggestions and possible ways to improve the way that you are approaching certain things, but nothing I would ever take away from you is your imagination and your overall conception of how things should go in this piece. I think is extremely strong, right? That the textures are just they're beautifully conceived and they're just first rate. So my motive here in giving you all this feedback is how do I make that conception stronger? And I hope that I have helped you to think of some ways that you could make this score even stronger. So anyway, that the only thing left to say is just really great work, and I feel very honored by the amount of work that you put into this to get it ready for this challenge, and I really think it helps to set the bar pretty high for the entire challenge when we get scores with this much work, this much craft and imagination and everything else. So great job, and I think in particular the artistic sensibilities that will be required to orchestrate next year's example, I think really will resonate with your artistic sensibilities and sense of craft. So it would be a shame if you weren't able to participate that year. Just stay posted for that. I guess at this point, 10 months from now, that will be announced. So thanks again. Thank you so much for the support on Patreon. Thanks to all the Patreon supporters and all of the viewers out there who have stuck with me this far and are watching all or most of these evaluations. It really makes a difference. Your views and your comments and reactions on social media and here on the channel. It just really helps to keep this conversation going, which I think makes us all stronger, me included. I'll see you soon with another evaluation of another great score.